She was a soldier's wife holding down the fort at home.
When you are married to the love of your life and that person is deployed for months at a time, it's hard to maintain a relationship.
She got lonely, but she put on a good outside appearance.
He was the breadwinner of the house, sending quite a bit of money back.
Until a horrific
Warning.
His left ring finger was sliced off, a clean cut with a knife.
The search for a killer leads detectives to an unusual fan club.
Everybody that's staying in the house is somehow involved with juggalos.
And a twisted plot emerges.
Somebody comes into the house wearing a mask. He's there to do no good. He's not there to scare.
You go back to who's the mastermind of this?
This is evil at its
7th, 2010, North Las Vegas, Nevada. A quiet neighborhood just a few miles from the Vegas Strip.
There's a real world in Vegas where real people live and work. Way away from the Strip, so you don't have all the hassle of being around there.
Not a high crime rate. It's not one of our known crime rate areas. There's a lot of military that live out there.
But the peaceful side of Vegas is about to receive a jolt. Just after 1:30 in the afternoon, Nicole Pritchard hears a frantic ringing at her front door. It's her 31-year-old neighbor, Brandy Stutzman.
My daughter answered the front door. She said, "Mom, it's B." And I said, "Okay, tell her to meet me around the garage." And I opened my garage.
The garage door rises and Nicole gets the shock of her life.
I realized when I looked down and she had blood on her shirt. She had said, "Joe's gone." And I said, "Joe's gone where? Where did he go?"
Brandy tells Nicole that her husband, 32-year-old Joe Stutzman, is dead.
Initially, I was in a panic. I said, "Did you call 911? She said, "No." I called 911.
Hi, my neighbor just came here. She lives across the street, and she said her husband has passed away. Do we know what happened to him? I don't know. She said there's blood everywhere. Okay, is there any way I can talk to her? Yeah, hold on. Okay. Brandy, what happened?
I don't know.
Okay, did you just get home?
Yes.
Okay, did he seem like he's unconscious?
No, he's cold.
He's cold?
Yes.
She kneeled behind my car and started rocking back and forth, crying on the phone with 911.
Within minutes, Las Vegas homicide detectives are on the scene.
There was multiple officers. They cordoned off the street. They wouldn't let you in or out.
The victim is found supine or laying face up in the kitchen area, and he's just soaked in blood.
He had some quite serious injuries that we could see just from on top of him. There's quite a bit of blood, severe wounds to his upper arms and chest.
I don't know how he's killed, so I don't know if he's been shot or stabbed, but something is causing him to bleed profusely.
I mean, the biggest questions going through your head was, who would have done this? Who would want to do this? What's going on?
Born in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1977, Joe Stutzman always had his sights set on life outside the small town.
Altoona's a somewhat depressed area as far as jobs go. At some point, he decided to join the military.
After making it through high school, he joined the Air Force.
First time I met Joe, and it was on deployment overseas. He was very opinionated, he was very loud, and he kind of would make smart aleck remarks to me. We both had the same kind of humor, stuff like that.
I think originally he signed up for 6 years. He was a crew chief in the Air Force for the stealth bombers. I was pretty proud of that.
Joe's military career came at a price. Frequent deployments cost him his high school sweetheart, Michelle.
Michelle and Joe were first loves. He joined the military, got stationed somewhere. They lost contact.
He was in high school whenever he dated her. It broke his heart. He was really pretty tender-hearted back then.
In 2002, the Air Force posted Joe to Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. Eager to get over Michelle, Joe took full advantage of Vegas nightlife.
I can tell you, living in Vegas with the temptations and the party atmosphere is definitely a lot of fun.
The handsome 24-year-old airman caught the eye of an attractive brunette named Brandy Norfleet.
Joe and Brandy met at a nightclub dancing, going out, hopping bars, baby.
Unlike Joe, Brandy was a Vegas native.
She was born and raised in a middle-class family. Her parents, they separated and ultimately got divorced.
Brandy's mother won custody, but struggled to properly raise Brandy.
Her mother made some mistakes. Brandy was taken from one place to another and really didn't have a good home life, wasn't provided for all the time. No stability.
A few years later, Brandy's father remarried and had a son named Aaron.
She cared a lot about her brother, just as she did everyone else in her family.
But when she was 18 years old, Brandy's beloved half-brother suddenly died when he was just a toddler. Though tragic, this hardship helped shape who Brandy was as a person.
She loved to always help. Anything you needed. You needed a stick of butter, she'd have it. There wasn't anything that she wouldn't do to help. She's very, very kind.
By the time Brandy met Joe Stutzman, she had grown into a selfless and caring woman, something Joe found attractive.
She was funny, very outspoken. He's always happy, always had a smile on his face.
Joe and Brandy were happy together. They would come over to my house and spend time with my family. We would have barbecues.
On June 14th, 2003, the couple married.
They got married and she found some stability, and it was great.
But just 10 days after the wedding, Joe left for a year-long deployment to Korea.
When you are married to the love of your life and that person is deployed for months at a time, it's hard to maintain a relationship. It is. I commend all of our service members, but it's hard to do that.
I think Brandy got lonely. I think she got lonely, but she put on a good outside appearance.
In 2004, Joe returned from his deployment, and by August 2005, the couple welcomed a son. They named him Aaron, after Brandy's brother who died when she was a teen. Having a child to support rekindled Joe's commitment to his career.
He wanted everything for Aaron. That's why he did those deployments, is why he worked so hard. It's family. A lot of us do this for family. Have a better life for him.
Joe eventually left the Air Force for a higher-paying job in the private sector overseas.
He almost tripled his salary overnight by taking on this job with an independent contractor. Joe Stutzman was making very good money by working in Afghanistan and Iraq in war zones.
He got his top secret security clearance, which made him pretty valuable.
The money was good, but the new job also meant more time away from his family. By the fall of 2010, the couple couldn't ignore the toll the time apart took on their marriage.
She wasn't there emotionally. He was trying to be there emotionally. And Brandy was depressed.
Joe being gone so long and stuff like that, he started noticing that different trends and different attitude in Brandy during that time period.
He goes, I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle it. I want my marriage to work. Can you pray for me? He was always wanting me to pray for him, which we did.
Unfortunately, those prayers would never be answered. On the afternoon of November 7th, homicide investigators begin inspecting Joe's bloody body on the couple's kitchen floor.
When you get a little closer, you can see that there was many cuts and stab wounds on his body.
He had very deep lacerations to his upper arm and shoulders where he had been cut Apparently, it looked like to the bone.
It was gruesome. Whoever did this was somebody that wanted this man dead.
When a knife is used, it's personal. Every time you plunge that knife into a living, breathing body, it's a very personal way to inflict a violent death on somebody.
Coming up, police hear stories of a turbulent marriage.
It was just crazy. And the fights kept getting louder and louder.
And detectives shift their focus to a suspicious group of teenagers who have ties to a notorious music fan club.
Many of juggalos are considered street gang.
Just after 1:30 p.m. on November 7th, 2010, Las Vegas homicide detectives have responded to a 911 call from Brandy Stutzman.
The crime scene was a bloody mess, for lack of a better term.
There's blood on the south gate, pedestrian gate into the backyard of the house, that it appeared that the killing scene was the backyard. There was some trees and some rock landscaping. There was blood all over the rocks on the patio, on the wall next to the door, and then the sliding glass door is open. There's a window adjacent to the door that's also open.
The obvious conclusion is that there was a struggle and he retreated inside, and that's where he perished.
Joe Stutzman probably confronted the perpetrator near the back entrance, the sliding glass door, and a fight was brought out into the backyard until Joe was stabbed to death and was managed to crawl himself back into the kitchen.
Did Joe unknowingly provoke his would-be killer? As detectives continue to process the scene, two details eliminate the possibility that this was a robbery gone wrong.
His left ring finger was sliced off, a clean cut with a knife.
When you get up close and you see that Joe Stutzman had had his wedding ring finger severed and it was missing, that this wasn't a burglar. This indicated there was something else going on.
The police searched everywhere. They looked everywhere in the toilets, they looked everywhere in the backyard, throughout the neighborhood. That finger was never found.
There are prints, there are fingerprints, palm prints, and none of them have any ridge pattern. It indicates that the killer is wearing gloves. So it also indicates that the killer has come prepared.
Gloves or not, a knife attack this brutal will likely mark both killer and victim.
Blood is very slippery. If you get blood on the knife, your hands are going to go forward on it and you're going to get cut, no question.
Detectives hope that canvassing the area will yield clues.
Detectives were going to go to the adjacent neighbors. You can't do this kind of killing quietly. So it's going to make a lot of noise, especially if it's in the backyard.
Neighbors tell police that there are always loud noises coming from the Stutzman home.
Things have become very contentious between the two of them.
It was just crazy. And the fights kept getting louder and louder. I could hear them at my house. I could hear them at night.
According to neighbors, when Joe was away, things got even worse. That's when the Stutzman home became a party house.
There was kids in and out constantly, all hours of the night. It was intimidating. It was a flop house.
Brandy lives there with her 5-year-old child. We're hearing from multiple sources at this point that Brandy has multiple teenage males that are staying or coming to the house every day. People are worried for the safety of the 5-year-old.
She would let them take her husband's truck and drive and go to the store or run errands, go to school. They would stay up all night and sleep all day.
They all had to leave when Joe came home.
Relieved neighbors say that Brandy hadn't hosted a party since Joe returned home about 3 weeks ago from Afghanistan. But one nearby resident says that the previous night at the Stutzman house was anything but peaceful.
We had a woman that lived in the area where Brandy lived, and she saw her the night before.
She hears banging and yelling, so she raises her garage door. She sits in the garage, and she can see Brandy at the front door, banging on the door, yelling for Joe. Joe finally answers the door after a long period of time, and then Brandy goes in.
Shortly after, the neighbors saw Brandy leave.
They had a discussion for however long that took, and then she was gone.
A few hours later, there was more commotion.
One of the neighbors actually reported hearing noise or what sounded to them like a scream, a male screaming at about 2 a.m.
Back at the crime scene, detectives ask Brandy for an explanation. She tells them she and her son spent the night at the house of one of her teenage friends.
She chose to stay at Sean's home. She had an extra room, and apparently his parents were okay with Brandy staying there. And so that's why she was not at the house.
Sean was just another kid that Brandy hung out with over at the house when Joe wasn't there.
Brandy says her neighbor must have spotted her at the house when she briefly returned to get supplies for the overnight.
She had left Sean's house to go over and meet with Joe because Joe had diapers and she needed those.
Brandy tells detectives that the next day, she returned home to have a heart-to-heart with Joe.
Purpose for her going over there is to try to reconcile the relationship, getting back together and going back to the point where they're going to live like husband and wife and raise their son together.
Instead, she found her husband stabbed to death.
Brandy was hysterical after discovering Joe's body.
She picks up his head and she holds his head, and then she realizes that he's deceased.
When detectives question Brandy about her crew of teenage boys, she appears to be forthcoming with information.
Brandy was very candid with law enforcement related to her involvement with kind of this group of young people.
Brandy says that the group of teens call themselves Juggalos and are obsessive fans of the band Insane Clown Posse.
The Juggalos and the Juggalettes, they follow the Insane Clown Posse, which is a rock music group or rap group.
Insane Clown Posse. It's basically two white rappers sing about, really outlandish stuff.
One of the fans of the Insane Clown Posse sent me the lyrics to one of the songs, which talks about cutting the finger off of somebody.
As detectives dig deeper, they find that most fanatical juggalos try to model their lives after Insane Clown Posse's lyrics.
Many of the juggalos are considered street gang members. So that was a bit of a twist for us. So we are looking at the group that's staying with Brandy even more seriously at this point.
Brandy reluctantly admits that one of the juggalos had been upset by her recent marital troubles, 19-year-old Jeremiah Merriweather.
She basically told the police the last person that could have been there or had some dispute with Joe was Jeremiah.
He has a protective type personality. He's large, 6'5", 280 pound, big guy, could take care of himself. Is it possible he took it upon himself and went and killed Joe?
It was at that point that the police started focusing their attention on Jeremiah.
Coming up, detectives track down Jeremiah.
He said she was a victim of domestic violence.
And the portrait of Brandy's life with the juggalos comes into focus.
She enabled them into creating more refuge for their drug and alcohol abuse.
Police investigating the brutal slaying of 32-year-old Joe Stutzman now have a suspect. According to Joe's estranged wife, 31-year-old Brandy Stutzman, a local teen named Jeremiah Merriweather had recently grown extremely protective of her.
Brandy tells the police who could have done this was that 19-year-old boy, Jeremiah.
Detectives track Jeremiah down at Sean's house. The same place Jeremiah tells investigators that he was home all night, and his physical appearance suggests he may be telling the truth.
Based on the extent of the wounds that we saw at the scene on Joe, you would have expected to find the person who inflicted those wounds to have some sort of injury on them. And Jeremiah didn't have any of those.
He had no injuries of that nature. Did not appear that he had been in a fight.
When detectives question others in the Juggalo gang, they learn that life with big sister Brandy was a young man's dream come true.
She basically turned her marital home into a flop house. These teenage boys would come into her home, hang out all day, from all hours of the day to the night hours.
They would listen to their music. They would talk about their relationships with Brandy. Brandy, she liked to be referred to as B or Sister B.
She basically opened her door to her home for these teenage boys. She would have alcohol at their disposal. She enabled them into creating more refuge for their drug and alcohol abuse. You got to understand, for a teenage boy to see a woman who's in her early 30s and has money and has a house, that's intoxicating to a young man.
But when detectives reach out to Brandy's friends and family, they learn the seeds of her bizarre relationship with the teens were sown in her own troubled youth.
Her mother was having a hard time, keeping jobs, especially living in Vegas, the odd hours and everything could be very demanding and stuff like that. So that's where she abandoned Brandy to her grandmother. The grandmother, took her in and, kept her, but at the same time, there were a lot of other factors that didn't help out Brandy's, upbringing.
Though Brandy eventually landed under the care of her father, the instability at a young age was hard on her. Friends say Brandy finally began to feel like she belonged to a family when her little brother Aaron was born, but his death reopened her emotional wound.
Her brother was like 2 when he passed away. She missed her baby brother.
Befriending and supporting the Juggalo crew many years later was Brandy's way of putting the tragic past behind her.
She was able to spend time and engage in conversation and activities of a brother-sister nature with people that would have been roughly his age.
Friends tell detectives it was only because of Joe's hard work that Brandy was able to sustain her partying lifestyle.
Joe was the breadwinner of the house and making good money, sending quite a bit of money back to her, and she's using that money to support her little gathering at the house.
However, friends say, no amount of money could make up for Brandy's disturbing claims about her marriage.
She said she was a victim of domestic violence and that she was emotionally abused and physically abused by Joe.
She said Joe's become abusive. He's using drugs. They can't be around each other.
They all believe that Joe's the bad guy. Joe's the primary physical aggressor in the fights that they've had, and that all the misery that she's going through in her life is because of Joe.
Detectives find numerous domestic dispute calls from the Stutzman home, but the complaints tell a different story than the one they've heard from Brandy's friends.
We have true evidence of documentation that she was the abuser. We have 2 situations that were reported to the police where 911 was called and officers came to the scene to investigate Brandy for abusing Joe.
Brandy had been arrested a couple of times for domestic violence involving Joe, most recently 2 days prior to the murder where she rammed his car, and so she went to jail for that.
On November 8th, Brandy Stutzman arrives at the station for a formal interview. She admits to losing her temper with Joe, but sticks by her story that they were fighting to make their marriage work.
She is trying to work it out with Joe. She goes over there. They have a very nice conversation. They decide to meet as a family the following day to work out the relationship and be back together again.
But when detectives turn up the heat, Brandy begins to crack.
Brandy then changes because the pressure, homicide detectives, that's what we do. We pressure you.
Brandy admits that on the night of the murder, she vented about the problems in her marriage while hanging out with the Juggalos at Sean's house.
She says Jeremiah didn't react well to that. He got angry. He leaves in the truck. She says I thought he was going home to where his mom lived.
She finally admits that she's awakened at Sean's house by Jeremiah about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Brandy stated that Jeremiah came back and that he had blood on him, on his clothes and both shirt and pants.
He admits to her that he had gone over and he had a confrontation with Joe and that he had stabbed him and that he was dead.
He said, I just planned to talk to him and it got out of hand. He came out with a knife, forced me, I had to stab him. She's hoping that it's not true, that Joe's okay, that Jeremiah's mistaken. She doesn't call 911. She goes to bed, goes to sleep. The next day, she doesn't want to go over there because she's worried, so she waits till the afternoon.
Brandy tells detectives she finally worked up the nerve to go home. That's when she discovered the body.
She said she had nothing to do with this. This was not her fault. I did not put this in motion, you know. It was Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the one who did it.
Detectives immediately bring Jeremiah in for questioning.
There was going to be a lot more to this. So we were going to dig even deeper. And we did.
Coming up, details emerge about a vicious crime of passion.
Somebody comes into the house wearing a mask. He's there to do no good. He's not there to scare.
And a new motive comes to light.
A lot of money was disappearing from his account. A lot of money.
Las Vegas detectives sit face to face with Jeremiah Merriweather, the 19-year-old boy accused by Brandy Stutzman of stabbing her husband Joe to death.
Jeremiah sits down in an interview room with Detective O'Kelly. They go through the entire scenario again. Jeremiah is holding on to the first story.
Detectives don't let up.
Hey, you're being completely fingered here for what happened. Brandy's throwing you under the bus. So you need to know this is what she's saying.
Finally, Jeremiah admits that he went to Joe's house that night around 2 a.m.
He explains that he had gone over to confront Joe about how he was treating Brandy. He just wanted to scare him. He wanted to confront him.
He goes to the door to talk to Joe. Joe comes out with a knife. It leaves Jeremiah no other option.
Jeremiah said it wasn't a murder. It was self-defense.
He laid it all on himself. He's cornered. Nobody else was involved. It was all him.
Jeremiah vehemently denies one more thing.
He says that he doesn't cut Joe's finger off. But at one point, Joe is, during the fight, is yelling, ow, my hand, my hand, my hand.
It's not the only question Jeremiah's self-defense story leaves unanswered.
The problem being is he goes there wearing gloves. We know he's wearing gloves. And then Jeremiah's saying, well, I had my hoodie up and I tightened it all down so he couldn't see my face very well. Well, why are you doing that if you went there to talk to him? So none of it makes any sense.
When police press Jeremiah for more details, he eventually cracks.
Jeremiah finally gave up this information about a powerboat.
The police looked at that boat and they started searching, and sure enough, underneath one of the couches, they found a bag.
Once the bag gets back to the criminalistics lab, then it's carefully opened up because we're still looking at the potential for fingerprints. They take things out one at a time. So we had a black pair of jeans. There was a long sleeve shirt. There were a couple of pair of gloves.
An unexpected item retrieved from the bag deals the last blow to Jeremiah's self-defense claim.
There was a Jason goalie mask, a black one, that was inside the bag.
It was a hockey mask, and so it covered his face completely. Somebody comes into the house wearing a mask. He's there to do no good. He's not there to scare.
A final revelation solves the riddle of why Jeremiah had no marks on his hands.
One of the most significant things about the contents of the bag was the knife. Now finally being able to see the knife. Being able to see the length of the blade, and in particular, the finger holes that were on the handle, that completely explained why Jeremiah didn't have any injuries on himself.
This is first-degree murder at its best because it shows that there was a plan. There was always a plan.
It almost seemed like it was a little too planned out, which makes you wonder, did he do this on his own?
Detectives revisit Brandy and Joe's friends and learn that whatever money Joe sent or brought home was never enough.
She's always constantly begging him for money, even though he was giving his entire paycheck to her. At one point, towards the end, I think he was making well over $200,000 and sending all of it to Brandy.
We talked about it, and he said a lot of money was disappearing from his account. A lot of money. I mean, we can account for, buying food, diapers, and stuff like that for the family, but when it's thousands of dollars at a time, it was pretty, outstanding. We're like, what's going on?
Discovering that Brandy and the Juggalos were blowing the money he sent home was the last straw for Joe.
The week that he died, he had already met with the local attorney here. She had prepared his divorce petition. He came in, he signed it. It was ready to be filed when he was murdered. That's when it came out that Joe had moved on. He came back in contact with one of his old girlfriends from his high school days, Michelle.
When things started to fall apart with Brandy, Joe made contact with Michelle, and they had re-entered each other's lives and started making plans for a future.
Joe loved Michelle a lot. He was very happy when they started rekindling because of the disarray going on in his home. He was very happy.
Friends say that news hit Brandy hard.
Quite frankly, Joe came clean and told her exactly what was going on and why he had started this relationship with Michelle. Well, Brandy became unglued. She became violent. She became absolutely toxic towards Joe, to the point where Joe's safety was a concern to many of his friends.
If Joe left Brandy for good, her free ride would be over.
She would have lost everything that she had.
Here's somebody who's uneducated, no working skills whatsoever, now with the fear of knowing that she may be a divorced woman in the very near future with no source of income, and the lifestyle that she had grown accustomed to, that is, hanging out with teenagers and doing drugs and alcohol, may be coming to an end.
The final straw for Brandy was Joe was on his way out the door, and she was going to lose her financial support and possibly the custody of her son. That was the final straw.
However, detectives discover that there was an upside for Brandy if Joe died.
He had a life insurance policy. It was worth approximately $213,000 to Brandy if Joe's dead. So she gets all the property. She gets $213,000 in cash, and she gets the child.
Detectives now have many more questions for Brandy Stutzman.
You go back to who's the mastermind of this? Who needs Joe dead? It's all Brandy. Brandy's the center of everything. I call her up and I said, could you come in and help us with the investigation of Joe's death? She said, sure.
Confronted with new evidence, Brandy changes her story again.
She indicated that there were several plans that were devised, not by her, but by Jeremiah and the others. One was that they were just going to go in there and scare him and rough him up a little bit. The second one was that they were going to break into the house, make it look like a burglary. She didn't think it was going to happen, that it was just talk.
Detectives are not buying it.
At the conclusion of her second interview with law enforcement, she was placed into custody and arrested.
Prosecutors charge Brandy and Jeremiah with felony murder. But even with a murder weapon in evidence, they worry that a jury won't connect the dots between Joe, his wife, and his killer.
We had our murderer. The person that caused the death of Joe Stutzman was in custody. But it still didn't make any sense to us. There were things that just didn't add up.
Why would Jeremiah do it instead of Brandy?
Coming up, prosecutors paint a brutal picture for the jury.
You could see where he's clutching the walls and the door. Joe Stutzman died horrifically in a very slow, painful death.
And the question of guilt is front and center.
There was no evidence of a formal plan.
What else do you need? He killed him. Brandy had nothing to do with it.
Nevada prosecutors hope to prove that in 2010, 31-year-old Brandy Stutzman and 19-year-old Jeremiah Merriweather conspired to kill Brandy's husband, 32-year-old Joe Stutzman, for his life insurance. If they succeed, Brandy could pay the ultimate price.
She was potentially facing the death penalty.
Even though she may not have been the person who actually plunged that knife into Joe's body, she set it in motion. She knew about it and she planned it, and she was part of this conspiracy.
At trial in January 2017, Brandy's defense goes on the attack. Jeremiah, they say, acted alone.
The defense's argument was he has already confessed. What else do you need? He killed him. Brandy had nothing to do with it.
While she was the beneficiary of a nominal amount of life insurance, the reality of the situation is she would have obtained a lot more money from Joe if he would have remained alive. There was no evidence that anyone helped him go to and from the crime scene. There was no evidence of a formal plan.
I didn't think that she was going to be convicted. I thought Jeremiah was going to.
That Brandy was more than just a big sister figure.
He actually used the term playing house, and he referred to it as a family unit. He enjoyed being part of that family unit while Joe Stutzman was away.
But Jeremiah insists under oath that it was Brandy who urged him to kill on the evening of November 6th, 2010.
The night of the murder, before Joe got killed, Brandy was actually, according to Jeremiah, fixing his hair, braiding his hair, and telling him how much this would mean to her. If he did this for her, he was going to save her family. He clearly was in love with her, thought the world of her, always doing things for her, cooking for her, taking care of her son. And that played such a powerful manipulation into poor Jeremiah's head.
Prosecutors say when Brandy went to the Stutzman home at 11:30 that same night, it wasn't to get diapers. She went to dose Joe with sleeping pills.
Brandy went over to the house that night to see what condition Joe was in. He's fallen asleep while they were talking. So now she's able to go back to Jeremiah and go, now's the time, because he's going to be out of it.
Jeremiah returned to the house wearing gloves and a hockey mask. Despite the pills, Joe fought back hard, but it was too late.
He was on his feet. He hit the ground outside. He got back on his feet. You could see where he's clutching the walls and the door. He's on his feet. He makes it inside. He hits the island. He goes back down. There was a lot of stabbing and a lot of cutting done. Joe Stutzman died horrifically.
It was extremely severe. As a reporter, you're sitting in the courtroom. You put up the pictures of this man's body, and it was gruesome. It was very disturbing to look at.
On February 2nd, the jury reaches a verdict.
The jury came back rather quickly, finding her guilty of murder in the first degree.
The judge sentences Brandy to life.
Brandy Stutzman will never step out of a prison wall for the rest of her natural life.
I was relieved that they found her guilty. She was the main factor in the death of her husband.
A question that neither the defense nor the prosecution can answer remains. What happened to Joe's missing ring finger?
I absolutely, to this day, believe that Jeremiah took the finger to Brandy and said, it's finished.
She knew exactly how to pick the individuals that she needed to do her dirty deed. She would focus her attention by manipulating these young kids, impressionable teenagers. This is evil at its best.
For Joe's friends and family, there's one thing that gives them peace.
We just need to remember Joe for what he's done, how he affected other people's lives, and how happy he made people around him, and how, he had been such a good friend to me and to everyone else.
I want him to be remembered for the benefit that he did for the Air Force and the guys over in Afghanistan, because he wanted to make a difference in life. He was kind and loving, and I think most people that knew him would attest to that.
The water was still that morning, February 13th, 2018. Lake Coeur d'Alene stretched out under a pale winter sky, the kind of cold that makes breath hang in the air like smoke. A small boat drifted near the shore, carrying a woman who was about to make a phone call that would unravel everything. 2 hours. That's how long she waited. 2 hours before dialing 911. 2 hours with the lake around her, silent and vast. 2 hours to think, to decide, to prepare what she would say. Her husband was no longer in the boat. The sunrise they had come to watch was long gone by the time help arrived. And when rescuers reached the scene, they found a woman with a bloody nose shivering, telling a story about a man who had simply fallen into the water. A story about a romantic morning gone wrong. A story that piece by piece would fall apart. What really happened on that boat? Why the delay? And why did nothing about this woman's story quite add up? Larry Eisenberg was born in Idaho in 1950, a true local who spent his entire life in the state. He grew up surrounded by forests and lakes, the kind of landscape that would shape his entire life. From an early age, he understood the value of hard work, a principle he would carry with him every single day until his last. He attended the University of Idaho, where he earned a degree in forestry. It was the natural choice for someone who had grown up watching the timber industry pulse through his community. After graduation, Larry built a solid career in the lumber business, eventually rising to become an executive in the industry. Colleagues knew him as tough, disciplined, and relentlessly frugal. He wasn't the type to waste money, and he wasn't the type to tolerate laziness. In 1974, Larry married his first wife. Together, they had 2 children, a daughter named Jessica and a son named Dean. He raised them with the same principles that guided his own life. Work hard, stay honest, be a straight arrow. His children remembered him saying things like that all the time, drilling into them the importance of integrity and effort. The marriage lasted until the children were grown, and then, like many long unions, it quietly came to an end. Larry and Lori's paths crossed through the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce, where both were active members of the local business community. Some accounts suggested she was hired as his secretary while he was still married, and that their relationship began after both their marriages had ended. Either way, by the time they became a couple, they presented themselves as 2 people embarking on a new chapter together. Lori Barnes was born in 1953 into circumstances far different from Larry's steady Idaho upbringing. She grew up in a sect of the LDS Church, and her childhood was marked by serious poverty. There were periods when her family had so little that they squatted in empty farmhouses, moving from place to place, surviving on whatever they could find. Despite these beginnings, or perhaps because of them, Lori developed a personality that drew people in. She had a smile that seemed genuine and a giddy laugh that put others at ease. By the time she reached adulthood, she had learned how to make people like her, how to present a version of herself that inspired trust. At 19, in 1973, she married Stephen Barnes. Over the following years, they had 6 daughters together. Lori threw herself into motherhood and, by all outward appearances, created a stable home. Her daughter Amber would later describe their early family life as perfect. Church every Sunday, lessons about living right, making good choices, getting good grades, doing chores. The structure that Lori had lacked in her own childhood, she seemed determined to build for her children. The marriage to Stephen lasted over 2 decades before ending in 1996. At 43 years old, Lori found herself a single mother, and she made a significant decision. She would start over in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. In this new city, Lori reinvented herself. She became deeply involved in community work, eventually earning the title of Volunteer of the Year from the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce. She was the kind of person who showed up at events, who remembered names, who made connections. Eventually, she rose to become the executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, a nonprofit organization tied to federal housing funds. It was a position of trust, a role that gave her access to significant resources meant to help those in need. To the outside world, Lori Barnes had overcome her difficult beginnings and become a pillar of her community. When Lori and Larry married, they brought together a blended family of 8 children, Larry's 2 and Lori's 6, along with 15 grandchildren and eventually a great-grandchild. It was a large, sprawling clan, and the couple embraced it fully. They owned a secluded cabin that they lovingly called our paradise, a place where the whole family would gather for holidays and celebrations. From the outside, the marriage looked like a fairy tale. Dean Eisenberg would later describe it as absolutely perfect. Friends used the word soulmates. A colleague who knew them both said Larry trusted Lori completely, without reservation. They traveled together constantly, visiting grandchildren, taking trips, building what appeared to be an ideal retirement. Lori's daughter, Chrislyn, would later recall how happy her mother seemed with Larry, noting the way he looked at Lori with genuine admiration. The stepchildren on both sides appeared to get along. Larry, despite being a tough and frugal man, had a warmth that extended to his new extended family. But certain details, invisible at the time, would later take on different meaning. Larry prided himself on fiscal responsibility. It was central to who he was, the man who taught his kids never to be lazy, never to waste, always to earn. He managed their money carefully, keeping track of every dollar. This was something Lori knew well. And yet there was something Larry didn't know. Something that existed in a parallel world hidden from his view, growing larger and more dangerous with each passing month. The day was February 13th, 2018, a Tuesday, the day before Valentine's Day. Larry and Lori had plans. They would take their boat out on Lake Coeur d'Alene before sunrise to watch the dawn break over the water. It was the kind of romantic gesture that fit their public image as devoted partners. After the boat ride, they intended to have a special Valentine's breakfast together. They left their home while it was still dark, the winter cold, sharp, and biting. The lake was quiet. At that hour, the water dark and calm. They launched the boat and headed out onto the water as the first hints of light began to appear on the horizon. According to Lori's account, everything was normal at first. They were out there together, watching the sky change colors, enjoying the peace of the early morning. Then she said something went wrong with the motor. Larry leaned toward it to investigate. He gave her a strange look. She would later mention something about stroke-like symptoms, a sudden change in his demeanor, and then he fell overboard into the frigid February water. That was her version. What happened next, according to the official timeline, was a gap, a period of approximately 2 hours during which Lori did not call for help. When asked about this later, she explained that she didn't want to leave the area where Larry had fallen, that she was searching, that she was hoping. At approximately 2 hours after the incident, she finally dialed 911. When rescuers arrived, they found Lori with visible injuries, a bloody nose, which she explained came from trying to save her husband. The boat was intact. Larry was nowhere to be found. The water temperature that morning was in the low 40s. In water that cold, survival time without rescue is measured in minutes, not hours. The search for Larry Eisenberg began immediately after the 911 call. Divers entered the frigid lake, and rescue teams scanned the water for any sign of him. Days passed. The community watched and waited. Lori gave interviews describing her grief, her shock, her devastation at losing her husband in such a sudden, tragic accident. About a week after the incident, Lori wrote a letter to friends and family, describing the morning in emotional detail: the trip to the lake, the accident, her desperate attempts to save him. The narrative she presented was one of a widow in mourning, but beneath the surface, investigators were already troubled. The 2-hour delay before calling 911 didn't sit right. The details of her story seemed to shift slightly with each telling, and then there were the injuries. Lori's bloody nose, which she attributed to rescue efforts, raised questions about what exactly had happened on that boat. On March 1st, 2018, Larry Eisenberg's body was recovered from the lake about 2.5 weeks after he disappeared. The discovery brought a measure of closure to those who had been waiting and hoping, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase, one that would reveal something no one expected. The autopsy that followed would change everything. When the medical examiner began the examination, they expected to find evidence consistent with drowning. A man in his late 60s falling into frigid water, his body submerged for weeks. The cause of death seemed obvious, but science told a different story. The medical examiner found something unexpected. Larry Eisenberg had not drowned. The cause of death was diphenhydramine toxicity, an overdose of Benadryl, the common antihistamine found in medicine cabinets across America. The concentration in his blood was 7,100 nanograms per milliliter, a level so far above therapeutic doses that it could only have been achieved through massive, deliberate ingestion. To put this in perspective, a normal dose produces blood levels far, far lower than what was found in Larry's system. This was no longer a tragic accident on a cold February morning. This was a homicide investigation. Suddenly, every detail took on new significance. The romantic sunrise trip, the motor problems, the strange look Lori described, the 2-hour delay, the letter to friends and family carefully crafted to establish an accident narrative, the bloody nose. And then investigators discovered something else. On the very day Larry disappeared, Lori had been exposed publicly for a completely different crime, one that would provide the missing piece of the puzzle. The double life Lori Eisenberg had been leading for years was about to collapse. As executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, Lori had access to federal funds intended to help low-income families with housing. Over a period of years, she had systematically stolen from this organization, creating false invoices and fake expenses, setting up shell companies in her daughter's names, and siphoning money into her own pockets and those of her children. The total amount she embezzled, over $500,000. 4 of her 6 daughters were implicated. Amber Hosking received approximately $1,650. Jessica Barnes received around $1,500. Tracy Tesh and April Barnes also received illicitly acquired funds. All 4 would eventually face federal charges. Larry Eisenberg knew nothing about this. The man who prided himself on fiscal responsibility, who taught his children to be straight arrows, who trusted his wife completely. He had no idea that she had been stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars and that federal investigators were closing in. The exposure was coming. And when Larry found out, his world would shatter. The woman he loved, the community leader he admired, the partner he trusted, she was a thief facing federal prosecution. The financial security he had worked his entire life to build would be threatened by restitution payments and legal fees. His reputation in the community would be tainted by association. Prosecutors would later argue that this impending exposure was the motive for murder. Lori couldn't let Larry discover the truth. She couldn't face the confrontation, the divorce, the complete destruction of the life she had constructed. And so, according to the prosecution's theory, she chose a different path. After Larry's death, Lori continued the deception. The letter to friends and family was part of it, establishing herself as a grieving widow, deflecting suspicion, but investigators found more troubling evidence of planning. Digital forensics revealed something chilling. While Larry and Lori were in Florida on their bucket list trip, someone had been conducting Google searches about drowning, currents, and deep water. The searches were traced to Lori, and there was another detail, small but significant. After Larry's disappearance, one of his friends received a text message that appeared to be from Larry's phone, but something was wrong with it. The message contained an emoji. People who knew Larry well said he never used emojis, ever. Phone records analysis showed that Lori, on the other hand, used them regularly. Then came the will. Investigators discovered handwritten changes to Larry's estate documents. Changes that would have shifted 80% of his assets to Lori's 6 daughters, leaving only 20% to Larry's own 2 children, Dean and Jessica. The alterations had not gone through proper legal channels. They appeared to be part of a plan to redirect Larry's wealth after his death. The investigation into Larry Eisenberg's death moved on 2 parallel tracks, the federal embezzlement case and the state homicide investigation. The federal case moved first. Lori was arrested and charged with wire fraud and theft from programs receiving federal funds. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of false invoices, fake companies, money trails leading directly to her and her daughters. In 2019, she pleaded guilty to the federal charges and was sentenced to 60 months in federal prison, plus ordered to pay full restitution and fines. But the murder case was more complex. Prosecutors needed to prove not just that Larry had been poisoned, but that Lori was responsible. The evidence, while compelling, was largely circumstantial. The pieces included the 2-hour delay before calling 911, the Google searches about drowning and currents conducted during their Florida trip, the diphenhydramine toxicity that had nothing to do with falling into water, the text message with the emoji sent from Larry's phone, the altered will documents, the timing of the exposure of the embezzlement, and the phone records that showed Larry had complained to his doctor about strange symptoms, shakes and foggy thinking, during their travels. Had Lori been poisoning him gradually, even before the boat trip? The symptoms Larry described to his doctor suggested he might have been ingesting something harmful without his knowledge. In February 2020, exactly 2 years after Larry's death, Lori Eisenberg was charged with first-degree murder. The charging documents cited aggravating factors, including the use of poison and lying in wait or torture. There was one complication, however. Prosecutors acknowledged they could not determine exactly how Larry ingested the fatal dose of diphenhydramine. Was it in his coffee, in food, in a drink on the boat that morning? The mechanism remained unclear. What was clear was that the level of the drug in his system was lethal and that it hadn't gotten there by accident. The case did not go to a full trial. Instead, in 2021, Lori Eisenberg entered an Alford plea to second-degree murder. An Alford plea is a specific legal mechanism in which a defendant does not admit guilt, but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to likely secure a conviction. It allows for sentencing without a full admission of responsibility, a legal technicality that would later cause significant pain to Larry's family. At the sentencing hearing, Lori spoke. She acknowledged that she was responsible for Larry's death, but her explanation stunned the courtroom. She claimed that she had intended to harm herself that morning, not Larry. She said she had prepared a drink laced with Benadryl for her own consumption, planning to end her own life because she couldn't face the exposure of the embezzlement. According to her account, Larry accidentally drank the poisoned beverage by mistake. The judge did not accept this version of events. Looking at the totality of the evidence, the Google searches, the altered will, the 2-hour delay, the text message with the emoji, the careful letter to friends establishing an accident narrative, The court found Lori's explanation implausible. It simply didn't fit the facts. Larry's family members addressed the court with raw emotion. His daughter, Jessica McPherson, spoke of the permanent hole in her soul left by her father's death and the impossibility of finding closure when the person responsible still refused to tell the truth. She described how Lori's Alford plea, avoiding a full admission of guilt, felt like salt on the wounds. Even Lori's own stepdaughter, Amber, spoke against her. She testified that Larry had been a wonderful father figure and grandfather to her and her siblings. She told the court that her mother had manipulated the family and that she and her sisters did not support Lori, did not stand by her. Looking back, Amber expressed regret that she hadn't cooperated with investigators earlier, before the full scope of her mother's deception became clear. The sentence was life in prison with a minimum fixed term of 30 years before parole eligibility. Combined with her federal sentence for embezzlement, Lori Eisenberg will not be eligible for release until 2050, when she will be 97 years old. The case had split the family down the middle. Larry's 2 children lost their father and watched the woman who killed him escape a full murder conviction through a legal maneuver. They sat through hearings and sentencing, carrying grief that had no outlet, facing a woman who wouldn't fully admit what she had done. Lori's 6 daughters were left to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the woman who had stolen money using their names, and then killed her husband to cover her crimes. The woman who had taught them to live right and make good choices had been living a lie for years, drawing them into her schemes, using their identities for fraud. One daughter, Chrislyn Woolston, had posted Lori's $75,000 bail after her arrest, believing in her mother despite the mounting evidence. When Lori later disappeared while out on bail, triggering a manhunt before she was eventually located, Chrislyn was left financially responsible for that bond. She later described the pain of realizing that her mother didn't care if she hurt her own daughter in her attempts to escape accountability. The woman who had raised her, who had taken her to church every Sunday, had abandoned her without a second thought. Another daughter, Amber, spoke publicly about the betrayal. On the stand, she stated clearly, "We do not support her. We do not stand by her." The words carried the weight of shattered trust, of a mother-daughter bond irreparably broken. Lake Coeur d'Alene is still there, quiet and vast, reflecting the sky the way it did on that February morning in 2018. The water doesn't remember what happened. It just keeps moving season after season, indifferent to the secrets that sank beneath its surface. Larry Eisenberg's children remember him differently than the headlines do. To them, he wasn't the victim in a murder case. He was the man who taught them about hard work and honesty. He was the father who took them hunting and fishing, who loved his dog, Echo, with pure, uncomplicated affection. He was someone who crossed items off his bucket list with childlike excitement. Watching a rocket launch, riding a fan boat, learning to sail. At 68, Larry believed he had earned a peaceful retirement with a woman he loved. He trusted Lori completely. He had no idea that beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, a different reality was taking shape. One built on theft, deception, and ultimately betrayal. The case raises questions that extend beyond one family's tragedy. How well do we really know the people closest to us? What secrets can hide behind a familiar smile, a giddy laugh, a reputation for community service? And how does someone go from Community Volunteer of the Year to convicted murderer? There are no easy answers. Lori Eisenberg's path from poverty to nonprofit executive to killer was paved with small deceptions that grew into larger ones, with financial pressures that mounted until they became unbearable, with a willingness to prioritize self-preservation above everything else, including the life of the man who loved her. Lori Eisenberg is currently incarcerated at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She sits there with the consequences of her choices while Larry's grandchildren grow up without him, while his children carry an absence that nothing can fill. The Paradise Cabin, where the blended family once gathered, sits empty of those memories now, its meaning forever changed. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some wounds don't heal with a verdict. But telling these stories matters, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to remember the people behind the cases. Larry Eisenberg was more than a crime statistic. He was someone's father, someone's grandfather, someone who believed in doing things the right way. This grim chronicle of Lori Eisenberg's descent into calculated criminality, culminating in the murder of her trusting husband, Larry, lays bare the perennial fragility of social trust and the insidious nature of moral decay within a seemingly stable society. We witness here a classic pattern of deception, driven by avarice and a desperate need to maintain a fabricated public persona, a pattern as old as civilization itself. Lori, a woman who rose from abject poverty to become a celebrated community leader, the executive director of a housing coalition, a position of public trust, systematically plundered federal funds intended for the most vulnerable. This is not merely a personal failing. It is a symptom of a deeper societal malaise, where the outward appearance of virtue can mask profound corruption. The institutions designed to safeguard public welfare, in this case, a nonprofit organization handling federal money, were exploited by an individual who mastered the art of manipulation. Such betrayals echo through history, from the corrupt Roman provincial governors who enriched themselves at the expense of their subjects, to the venal officials in various empires who siphoned off state resources, weakening the very foundations of governance. The trust placed in Lori by the community, by her employer, and most tragically, by Larry, was systematically dismantled for personal gain. Larry Eisenberg, a man forged in the crucible of Idaho's timber industry, a paragon of hard work, fiscal responsibility, and integrity, was precisely the kind of citizen whose values are essential for a robust republic. He embodied the ancient virtues of self-reliance and honesty, teaching his children these same principles. His trust in Lori was absolute, a testament to his own straightforward nature, making him a prime target for someone whose life was built on an elaborate edifice of lies. This dynamic, the honest, hard-working citizen undone by the Machiavellian machinations of a deceitful elite, is a recurring tragedy. Think of the Athenian citizens who, after the Peloponnesian War, found themselves at the mercy of oligarchs and demagogues, men who spoke of public service while pursuing private enrichment, ultimately eroding the very fabric of their democracy. The slow, deliberate poisoning of Larry, suggested by his pre-mortem symptoms of shakes and foggy thinking, speaks to a chilling premeditation, a calculated cruelty that far exceeds a crime of passion. This was not a sudden outburst, but a cold, rational decision to eliminate a problem, a human obstacle to her continued deception. The timing of the murder, coinciding precisely with the public exposure of her extensive embezzlement, reveals a stark utilitarian calculus. Larry was not just a husband. He was a liability, a man whose discovery of her $500,000 theft would have shattered her carefully constructed world. His moral rectitude, his insistence on straight arrow principles, made him an intolerable witness to her deep corruption. The choice to murder him rather than face the consequences of her actions is a profound statement on the moral bankruptcy that can take root when self-preservation becomes the sole, unyielding imperative. This is the behavior of a tyrant, albeit one operating on a domestic scale, who views others not as fellow human beings, but as instruments or impediments to their will. The 2-hour delay before calling 911, the Google searches for drowning, the altered will, the fake text message with an emoji Larry never used. These are not the actions of a grieving spouse, but of a calculating criminal attempting to construct a false narrative to manipulate the perception of reality. This manipulation of truth, the crafting of a convenient fiction, is a hallmark of those who operate outside the bounds of honor and law. From ancient despots who rewrote history to modern propagandists who distort facts, the control of narrative is a powerful weapon. Lori's Alford plea, a legal maneuver allowing her to avoid a full admission of guilt while accepting conviction, further underscores her refusal to confront the truth, a final act of evasion that inflicted additional pain on Larry's family. It highlights a system that, while aiming for justice, sometimes offers avenues for the morally culpable to escape full accountability, leaving victims with an incomplete sense of closure. The splitting of the family, with Lori's own daughters testifying against her, is a devastating consequence, revealing the collateral damage of such profound deceit. The erosion of familial bonds, the shattering of trust within the most intimate circles, is a microcosm of what happens to a society when integrity is abandoned. When a mother, who once taught her children to live right, becomes a perpetrator of fraud and murder, using her own daughters' identities in her schemes, the very foundation of moral instruction crumbles. This is reminiscent of the breakdown of social order in periods of great upheaval, where loyalty and kinship are sacrificed on the altar of personal gain or survival, as seen in the civil wars of Rome or the internecine conflicts of medieval Europe. The Paradise Cabin, once a symbol of family unity and joy, now stands empty, its meaning corrupted by betrayal. This physical manifestation of loss, a place once filled with warmth now cold and silent, serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of such actions are not merely legal but deeply existential, altering the very landscape of memory and belonging. The case of Lori Eisenberg is a stark warning. The veneer of respectability, the accolades of community service, can conceal a predatory nature, and the pursuit of self-interest, unchecked by moral compass or fear of accountability, can lead to the most heinous acts. It is a timeless lesson that the health of any civilization depends not just on its laws and institutions, but on the character of its citizens and the unwavering commitment to truth and justice, even when the truth is ugly and inconvenient. The willingness to deceive, to steal, and ultimately to kill to preserve a lie demonstrates a profound moral sickness, a cancer that, if left unchecked, can metastasize through the body politic. The narrative of Lori Eisenberg is a cautionary tale, a grim reminder that eternal vigilance is required not only against external threats, but against the internal decay that can rot a society from within. The case of Lori Eisenberg is a stark and chilling testament to the profound fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when personal ambition and deceit are allowed to fester unchecked within the heart of a community. What this reveals about the health of our current system is a disturbing paradox. We celebrate public service and community involvement, yet these very platforms can be exploited by individuals who master the art of deception, using their outward respectability as a shield for deep-seated corruption. Larry Eisenberg, a man of simple, honest virtues, represents the foundational trust upon which any healthy society is built. His absolute faith in his wife, a woman lauded as a community pillar, was his undoing. This speaks to a dangerous vulnerability in our modern world, where the performance of virtue can be so convincing that it blinds even the most discerning. The erosion of social trust, evident in Lori's systematic embezzlement and subsequent murder, is a corrosive force. When those entrusted with helping the vulnerable instead prey upon them, when family bonds are shattered by calculated betrayal, the very glue that holds a society together begins to dissolve. The short-term consequences for Larry's family are immediate and agonizing. A father brutally taken, a legal system that, through an Alford plea, denied them the full admission of guilt, leaving wounds unhealed. For Lori's own daughters, the revelation of their mother's double life, her use of their identities for fraud, and her ultimate act of murder represents a profound and irreparable rupture of familial trust and identity. The long-term consequences extend beyond this single tragedy. Such cases breed cynicism, fostering a pervasive suspicion that beneath every smile and every act of public service might lie a hidden agenda. This suspicion undermines the willingness of citizens to engage, to volunteer, to trust institutions and leaders, fearing that they too might be exploited or betrayed. Deterrence is challenged when individuals like Lori Eisenberg, driven by overwhelming self-preservation, are willing to commit the ultimate crime to avoid exposure. The perceived benefits of maintaining a fabricated life, even at the cost of another's, outweigh the fear of legal repercussions until it is too late. The institutions meant to provide oversight, while eventually uncovering the embezzlement, were not swift enough to prevent the murder, highlighting the constant struggle to detect and prevent such insidious forms of corruption. The Paradise Cabin, now an empty shell of memories, symbolizes the broader societal cost, the destruction of shared spaces, shared histories, and shared dreams when integrity is sacrificed. The prophetic warning from history is clear. Civilizations crumble not always from external invasion, but often from internal rot, from the decay of civic virtue, from the triumph of self-interest over communal good, and from the erosion of truth itself. When the pursuit of personal gain, coupled with a pathological need to maintain a false image, leads to murder, it signals a deep sickness in the moral landscape, a sickness that demands our unwavering attention and a renewed commitment to the foundational principles of honesty, accountability, and justice, lest the very fabric of our society unravel, thread by painful thread.